necessarily, just different things, different philosophies that would be for morality, whether it's called, the universal maxim, and or whether it's called, um, the based on the consequence or whatever it is, all these different things. And they don't understand a philosophy that way of morality, but they do recognize that there is that there's something that comes out of a certain behavior. So they would experiment how to get my way around people. And what they usually understand is that compliment shows and is a way of expressing that I was able to get some type of an authority over that person, in where I managed to let them think that what I did was a good thing. And therefore I managed to get some kind of a power over them. And that's for a person that's a leader. But for a child, you don't always want to necessarily just scold them for everything, because many times this experiment, you need to intervene as a parent and actually say, well, here's the lesson learned. You were experimenting this, but here's the lesson learned. The lesson learned is that, making fake news, people are either going to recognize that you just made up a story, or people are going and they're going to stop trusting you, or people are going to recognize that down the road, or they're going to start losing, they're going to start, you're going to probably overcome a certain challenge of how do I get to these people, and you might manage to make them think that you are somehow like a rich person, or somehow you're very important, and all these different things. But then people are going to discover that you don't have that.
Yeah.
So, don't wear something that's bigger than your size. The second you're going to wear something that's bigger than your size, you're going to trip on it. You're going to trip, and people are going to discover your weaknesses, and you're going to look really ugly. All right. So it's really intervening to, make them understand the philosophy of their different experiments before it becomes too late. All right. We are actually on Surah Al-Baqarah. All right, here we are. And in Surah Al-Baqarah, we actually did this part, but there are actually a number of different things. Last time I would say we kind of skimmed through it really fast, and I want to go further and farther in the tafsir than the part that I just mentioned earlier. And I would actually like to draw a number of different I would say graphs or demonstrations and captions, just to help us actually understand some of the details in here. And of course, we talked about, I'm just going to zoom out just a little bit, okay, because that's going to help us see the page in let me say in a different angle. And this is really important, because when you're actually talking about tafsir, there are a number of different things that you need to recognize. So this first one, let me actually put in, I want Khadija, if you can be a co-host. I'm going to put a number of people to be the co-host that way, and Sarah, so you guys can do me a favor and actually admit the people. And I guess Utindy, oh, she ran away. Okay. So that way you guys can just do me a favor and admit people. So when we talk about Aqidah, there are actually a number of different angles to it. Yes, there is Tawheed al-Uluhiyya and Tawheed al-Rububiyyah. What is al-Uluhiyya and what is al-Rububiyyah and what is al-Asma' wa-Sifat? All right, when we speak about Tawheed, there are actually a number of different things that relate to it. One is that you recognize the Lord Almighty as being the Lord and the creator of everything. But it's not just recognizing the Lord Almighty being the creator of everything, but there are some details that actually fall within it. So let's see. إن في خلق السماوات والأرض واختلاف الليل والنهار. So this ayah is actually related to the existence of the Lord Almighty. في خلق السماوات والأرض, in the creation of the heavens and the earth. And then, so after it talks about the basis of the creation, then it talks about the function. All right, that even the function that you don't control, or the function that you control, which is الفلك التي تجري في البحر. So اختلاف الليل والنهار. So in the creation of the heavens and the earth, right? واختلاف الليل والنهار, and even how the changes of day and night, and the changes of the different things that you see in the world, that is, and even the things, the different patterns that you control, that you as a human being manage to control and understand in terms of the creation, whether we're talking about you manage to understand how electricity works and manage to understand a number of different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in this world. It's not that you created them. It's that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created the pattern, and you managed to understand how the pattern works. And if there was no pattern, then you would not have been capable of inventing and making use of the system, because you would have been really trying to figure out each and every single time the experiment would go wrong. But the reason why you were capable of designing, whether designing an ark to sail over the sea, or whether you managed to design electricity, or whether you managed to design cars, whatever it is, at the end of the day, it's basically trying to tell you that there is a pattern, the system that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created. And since there is a system, then the system is not far from having even this whole life within a system. So the system actually tells you that there is a purpose to life, because the system is not designed for any absurdity. The system in itself was actually put in for a purpose. So if everything within the system actually works for a certain purpose and for a certain cause, then the overall system, which is life in general, actually has a purpose and was created for a cause. Then therefore, to think that this world was created in absurdity is an absurd idea that even nature does not actually reflect. You see it? Nature, in what you see around you, does not actually reflect anything to be an absurdity. Everything has a purpose, therefore life has a purpose, and to claim absurdity, or to claim that there is no purpose to life, is in itself an absurd idea, which is really important to say, because when you actually continue the ayah, let's say, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, you want to recognize how the Lord Almighty created everything in a certain cause, therefore absurdity is not whatsoever within was not whatsoever within the whole process, or within the whole idea, is really how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us right there that everything was created within the system. Therefore, the system itself is actually speaking the Lord Almighty's power. So let's see it. والفلك التي تجري في البحر. So what happens? Well, whether you're talking about your ability to sail with an ark over the sea, بما ينفع الناس, and all of it was actually in order to bring about a solution, or in order to bring about a benefit for people. بما ينفع الناس. It's all to help and to benefit people. وما أنزل الله من السماء من ماء. And even the different things that you would recognize, or sometimes not recognize, but you recognize how it functions. But recognizing how something functions does not actually mean that you control how it should function. Because if you do not control the system, that is how the water, for example, how the water falls and pours from the skies. And here's one thing: the water, we know that the water doesn't come from the sky. All right, the water actually pours from the clouds. All right, But here's one thing. The word is sama is everything that's above you. So your sama right now is really the ceiling. All right, is really the ceiling. Anything that is above you is actually sama. So having that being said, when it actually said that it pours from the skies, it was actually referring to the clouds. All right. So minas sama, but it was referring to, well, something but from above you. And where it pours from above, but pouring from above, you could see فَأَحْيَا بِهِ الْأَرْضَ بَعْدَ مَوْتِهَا. And the earth starts getting alive with the different plants on earth. But that's in order to explain to you that what brings life is really from above. All right, is really from above. If what brings life is really from above, therefore, everything that is on the top or the bottom is actually connected with one another. If they're both connected to one another, the top and the bottom, all right, everything is basically from one cycle, one creator, and therefore, to recognize the pattern in where the Lord Almighty tells you that He had brought life to the basically to earth after its death, and then created and basically brought in the different creatures. Why? Because they managed to find their source of food. And that's what brings in the different dabba, the different animals. All right. But in order to have this whole cycle, whether precipitation or condensation, whatever in terms of the water cycle takes place, that actually is controlled by the wind. Without the wind, you would have actually not had any water pouring in, because we know what with the water cycle, you've got the water evaporating, condensation, and then precipitation. And with the water cycle, that is all brought in by tasrif al-riyah. By what is tasrif? Tasrif actually means the push. That is basically the circulation of riyah, the circulation of wind. But then it also said, وَالسَّحَابِ الْمُسَخَّرِ بَيْنَ السَّمَاءِ وَالْأَرْضِ. What controls all the water cycle is really السَّحَابِ الْمُسَخَّرِ. The clouds, the word al-musakhar actually means subjugated. In other words, they're controlled. They're controlled by who? They're actually controlled by the Lord Almighty. Between the heavens and the earth, you will see that even the clouds are basically subjugated, controlled, and all that is لآيات لقوم يعقلون. So why did it say لآيات? لآيات is actually meaning two things. It can mean a miracle, and it can also mean a sign. So when I say an ayah of something, you could see that even the Quran, they're basically ayat. So what does that actually mean? That the Quran is actually taking us from the written book to the open book, which is the world. In other words, the Quran is telling you, you want evidence on the existence of the Lord Almighty. You want evidence on the existence of the Lord Almighty, simple. Recognize the signs by looking at the open book and recognizing the pattern. The pattern actually reflects that the world actually was brought in a certain system. A system cannot come in without a reason for that system. So the reason for the system, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَآيَةٍ لِقَوْمِ يَعْقِلُونَ. That's basically a sign, basically a miracle for people, يَعْقِلُونَ. The word يَعْقِلُونَ actually is talking to you about, remember, when we talked about the equivalent things, remember, we talked about Islam is equivalent to basically a person using their mind, and that's where they're processing it through their aql, and then the level of iman processes through the qalb, and then that is processed to bring about another understanding of the world, in where you're believing Allah Almighty, the angels, the malaika, al-kutub, al-nabi, al-anbiya, etc., even though that was actually supposed to be part of arkan al-Islam as well. but you could see that it's a different level of being able to see. So this is in order to say that when we're talking about understanding of God and Tawheed, remember what we said earlier, the levels of Tawheed, you've got Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah, Tawheed al-Rububiyyah, and Tawheed al-Asma wa Sifat. So this is actually putting in and laying out the first demonstration of what actually proves the existence of the Lord Almighty and telling you, well, you actually need to recognize with your mind by looking at the world around you, whether you are an expert. And of course, the stronger you are within a field, you'll be able to recognize how intricate the details are a lot more than somebody that is not specialized within this field. Definitely a person that specialized in probably in science definitely is capable of understanding and recognizing how the whole water cycle works in very detailed and very intricate way, and in a very, in fact, very precise, even in the numbers of it, and how that actually reflects the magnificence of the Lord Almighty. Definitely a lot more than somebody that doesn't know much about water cycle, but they're still going to be capable of understanding. They're still going to be capable of understanding that there is a magnificent creator behind this creation, right? So this is right there, the first beginning of Tawheed. The second part of Tawheed, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَندَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُم كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. Let me explain this one first. وَمِنَ النَّاسِ, and they're from the people who would take andadan. Andadan actually means equivalent, or in other words, equal. يُحِبُّونَهُم. They would love them as they would love them كحب الله. والناس ما يتخذوا من دون الله أندادا يحبونهم كحب الله. They would love them as much as they would love Allah. والذين آمنوا أشد حبا لله. And the believers are actually أشد, would love Allah Almighty even more. ولو يرى الذين ظلموا. And if only those that had transgressed the limit, when they would see the punishment and the torments, that the power of the Lord Almighty, and that all the power belongs to Allah Almighty, and the Lord Almighty is Shadidul Iqab, is great, or is powerful, Shadidul Adhab, Shadidul Adhab, in his torments. Now, what is that supposed to take us? I want you guys, with this ayah, I want to recognize when we talked about Tawheed, all right? We talked about Tawheed al-Rububiyyah and Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah. Now, here's one thing. When you talk about Tawheed, it's really important to recognize that there's part of Tawheed that actually comes with al-Hub. What is that? Al-Hub is actually love, and which is why this ayah was emphasizing the part about love. Now, how do I actually understand love? How do I actually understand this whole thing? All right, now here's the center. Everything has a center. Even when we're talking about people, there are actually these centers. All right, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can actually see it. All right, so there are actually these centers. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center, and that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is actually telling you right there, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَندَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُم كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. The people that would actually take people, whether it's people or whether it's people or whether it's deities, at the end is that they would make them the center of their life. They would love them more than Allah Almighty. What is that telling us? Is that there's actually a center for faith. The center for faith is actually love. Where did we get that from? The Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, there are actually a number, I'm going to lay out the different hadiths, and then I want you guys to recognize those patterns. In the first hadith, the Prophet ﷺ actually said that you would not be a believer until you would hate to be thrown in kufr, in disbelief, as much as you would hate to be thrown in hellfire or in fire. That's how much you would hate to leave your deed. Look at the center. It's talking about love and hate. Let's go for another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, you would not be a believer until you would love me, that is the Prophet ﷺ, and Allah Almighty, more than your own children, more than your own self. Umar ibn al-Khattab couldn't fathom this. And he said, I love you more than my own kids, but my own self, he had to work on it. He didn't lie about it. He said, I need to work on this. Then he goes away and starts working on it. And then he said, now it happened. And the Prophet ﷺ said, now you had entered the area of Iman. So what is that telling us? That Iman cannot be, let's go for another hadith. The Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith that لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. You would not be a believer until your desire goes in pattern or is on the same path of what I had come with. In other words, what? We're talking about, in the first hadith, we're talking about the Prophet ﷺ actually telling us that when you love the deen, when you love Allah Almighty, and you would hate Allah Almighty, which is kufr, as much as you would hate to be thrown in fire. That means what? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala love him so deeply that he becomes the center. And then taking two, which is when we talk about behavior. All right. When do you love someone? You love someone when you want to replicate and mimic their behavior in every way. Let me give you an example. Right now, there is the trend of piercing. It's painful. Piercing is painful. But why would people do it? People would do it because they want to mimic certain figures. Mimicking these certain figures, despite the pain to them, the pain is worth the feeling of expressing love. There's pain, especially tongue piercing. I was told that it's extremely painful. Why would you do it? SubhanAllah. And that's the thing, is that when you're actually trying to love somebody, there is some form of giving up on something. Whether you're giving up on your body, you're giving up on your wealth, you're giving up on so many different things to do for that person to express the love. All right, which is where the behavior comes in. And then the third one, which is where the Prophet ﷺ actually said, لا يؤمن أحدكم حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به. You wouldn't be a true believer until your own desires are really at the same pattern of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent the Prophet ﷺ with. What is that telling us? It actually goes farther than just a behavior, but it's actually even getting some form of, this is not talking about halal and haram, but this is actually talking about your desire. You just enjoy implementing your deed. You just enjoy practicing your halal. You find joy in reading Quran. You enjoy it. You find joy in wearing hijab, just as the other person may find joy in enduring the pain for getting a piercing. They're getting a piercing. They know, and they were told that it's painful, but they're actually finding joy in it. You see it? Now, this is not the first part, in where it's actually finding joy in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands. That's a believer. All right? Finding joy in what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands. Now, here's one thing. When you actually look at the part about hub, it is also the center. Just as love is the center for kufr, It is also the center for Iman, which is why that ayah, let's look closely. So the ayah says, وَمِنَ النَّاسِ مَن يَتَّخِذُ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ أَندَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. So what happened? These people that take other deities or other people, so the andad can be very comprehensive. It can be the deities, something exclusive, and it can be something that is not exclusive or particular to a particular item. It can be something more comprehensive to include people. So if you love someone dearly, as much as you are supposed to be loving Allah, everybody's going to say that that they love Allah. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, it's really actions that prove it. It's not a word to claim. It's really actions that prove how much you love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and which is why I'm actually going to demonstrate this in a number of different things. So we've got the core, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right, that's the center. And you've got the center right there for somebody that's not a believer. All right, so if you look at this for a mu'min, all right, and for somebody that's just called a kafir, okay? For a mu'min, the center is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala demonstrates, even in terms of family, all right, demonstrates that in terms of when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically lay out, وَقَضَى رَبُّكَ أَلَّا تَعْبُدُوا إِلَّا إِيَّهُ. Your Lord Almighty had decreed that you would only worship Him. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. Here it is. Parents, they basically take the second circle. وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. And for the parents, they have the right to إحسانا, to be given all the piety and the respect and the righteous relationship with them. And then what happens? وَبِالْوَالِدَيْنِ إِحْسَانًا. All right. So I'm not going to focus so much on the parents, but then the third one is going to be the family. All right. So your family actually has the second circle. And here's one thing. I want you guys have to look at this circle, because this circle is actually going to explain a lot. Okay. You've got the family. Then you've got what? You've got an extended family. Extended family. So we're talking about cousins. We're talking about all that. All right. Then you've got what? You've got the community, friends, etc. All right. Now, here's one thing. If at all, just like, for example, when you work out the atom, all right, if you actually change, you guys know it in chemistry, you change how the atoms and the electrons are distributed within the atom, what happens? Everything just goes into a malfunction. It changes into a different product. It goes something else. All right. And that's the same thing. In where when you look at those fields, everything is supposed to be within a certain area. All right. Now, when you look at the parents, if you don't actually put your parents at number the second area, and let me actually put also the husband and wife relations right there. All right. The husband and wife relations, let's call it spousal. Okay. You guys know it. We'll just leave it right there. And that's the same thing. When you actually look at this, if you at all mix these areas, so for example, let's put in a friend. If your friend was actually given the position of a parent, what does giving your friend the position of a parent? Your parent is going to construct or instruct a number of different things of how and what you do at home or what you do in your life. Why the parents? Why not someone else? Because your parents actually have the experience, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given your parents, had given them the instinct to care for you. Yes, not always is the parent necessarily right in all matters, but their experience in life is actually going to make them more qualified to give you the instruction than the experience that you actually have. The experience in itself is actually a qualification. And that's why even if you were to apply for a job, they would always consider experience as actually part of your CV. Because without an experience, Even if you have the degree for it, they might not actually let it pass. Why? Because having the knowledge to do something, it doesn't actually mean that you know how to apply it on ground. You can have the theory of it. Theory is different than practice. All right. So if, let's say, you would give your friend, all right, the position and respect that you would give your parents, what happens? You've actually let your friend in an area, in the area that they should not be in. That's the wrong zone. And this is really important to mention. Everything has its own zone. So for your husband and your husband and the wife, if anybody would actually enter this zone, it would actually be considered a major sin, which is what we know of cheating. All right. There is a sacred area. These zones are actually sacred. You can't let anybody in them. These zones, if you don't know these zones, then you're going to be really lost in terms of distributing your focus, your respect, your priorities, which is why the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith, when the Sahabi came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, who's the most one that deserves my love and my respect? He said, your mom. Then who? Your mom. Then who? Your mom. Then who? 3 times says it, your mom, and then finally says, your dad. What was he trying to say? He was trying to distribute the zones, that there is a certain zone that you have to recognize. The second that you don't recognize that zone, then you're going to get off track. If you get off track in the way you distribute your time, your focus, your respect, then you have surely committed an injustice, a social injustice that you didn't recognize. So when you actually look at this distribution right there, it's basically putting everything within the limit. So therefore, let's just say, the parent, let's just assume that the parent actually wanted to order you to do something that the main zone, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and ordered you to do something haram. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell you? No, لا طاعة لمخلوق في معصية الخالق. Don't obey anyone in disobeying Allah Almighty. Why? Because then that person had entered a zone that they shouldn't be in. You see it? So you've got every single one actually has a certain zone. And even when it comes to family members, there's a certain zone even for family. What is that zone? Inna Allah ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. Let's write it down. Al-adl and al-ihsan. What are those? So al-adl is basically justice. Yeah, they have a certain responsibility. That's the equality part. I give certain things. They've got responsibility. We've got rights, responsibilities. But here's one thing, is that many times and oftentimes it does happen between the family members that they might actually not act justly. And then their own misbehavior, their own anguish, anger, desire, just not wanting to do what they're supposed to be doing can get off track. But here's one thing, is that when one just doesn't do his responsibility within his field, if we're actually going to every single time say, well, they were supposed to be doing this role, then therefore, because they didn't do the responsibility, I'm going to get off my zone. What's going to happen? Chaos. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, wait, even if this person within this zone, even if they didn't do what they should have been doing, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, you do the right thing. Stay within your zone, do what you need to be doing, and maintain al-ihsan. What is al-ihsan? Al-ihsan, yes, these people didn't do what they were supposed to be doing, which is justice, which is what is fair. I give you this much, you give me this much. That's the way the whole world functions. I put in this much effort. In return, you also have a certain responsibility. That's the way the whole world was actually created. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you when a person goes beyond the limit, there's the ihsan. But here's what happens. It's so easy for the family members to transgress their limit because of a number of different reasons. As family members, your sister definitely transgresses her limits a lot more than an outsider. You know why? This is everywhere. Even my relatives, I would have more respect from strangers than relatives. A lot more respect. It's everywhere. It's everyone. In fact, even the Prophet ﷺ, his own family transgressed the limits, like Abu Lahab was his own uncle. He transgressed the limit more than anyone else, which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made a surah, revealed a surah about Abu Lahab, but didn't reveal a whole surah about other ones, because Abu Lahab had transgressed the limit more than anyone else. Relatives can actually be more harmful than extended relatives or even the community. This is really common. Your own relatives. Why? They know your weakness. And they're supposed to be the ones to support you. Number three, when they're family members, they manage to know a lot of, let's call it, about secrets about you that usually in public, we actually maintain our privacies, and maintaining our privacies is what usually gives us the confidence, the honor. We try to keep it secret because it gives us confidence and honor. But when do we share it? We usually share things when we feel that it gives us more power. I'm this, I studied this, etc. We usually share it because it gives us more power. What does more power actually mean? Advantages, making a lot of things easier in the world that we live in. So what happens what does it mean to actually make the world easier for us? It actually means that it makes our movement within the zones easier. You see it? Within the zones, it makes it easier. So when you look at these zones, even though they may not exist, they're imaginary lines, but these zones, especially for those that are visual, okay, these zones are really important to recognize because they help you recognize. That's why, for example, information that happens within your home, don't share it to the outside. That's supposed to be an inside information. It's supposed to be an inner zone. Don't share it to the outside. What happens within your home, that's supposed to be a home zone. Don't share it publicly. What happens between a husband and a wife, don't share it. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you that حافظات فالصالحات قانتات. What about them? حافظات. What about them? حافظات للغيب. They preserve privacies. Why? Because it's a zone. Your bedroom is a zone. Your husband and what he does in terms of mistakes and sins and etc., that's a zone. You shouldn't get that zone out. So what kind of things are supposed to be preserved within a zone? Hey, information. That's why, even if it was a country, to get information within that country outside for another country is actually considered illegal. And every country may actually punish for anyone sharing this information. You guys get that? If, for example, and we've got what happened to the Watergate or what happened to a number of different scandals, what was it all about? It was about sharing national information. It was about sharing inside information to an enemy. At the time, it was Russia. Sharing that information is actually considered treason. And then what happens? You can get executed for it. Why? Because it would be considered that you had shared an information and put the whole country under threat. The information is actually part of what maintains every zone together. See it? That's why even Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, حافظات للغيب, preserved what no one else sees within the home. As women, why did the ayah actually emphasize for women and didn't emphasize that on men? As women, we tend to enjoy ventilating and speaking and talking about the different things. Something, maybe just going to Aldi and just grabbing something, just takes 5 minutes and gets out. But a woman can talk about it for half an hour, right? She can talk about it and spend a whole hour, even though it just took 5-10 minutes. But she has the ability to scrutinize all the different details of what the woman next to her was wearing and how she was walking and all that. But for the man, they won't even recognize. And that's why, have you ever seen when a man wants to look for something, it's right in front of them, they can't even see it. But for a woman, they're capable of giving you all the information of what was there, the details, what it looked like, and all these different things that many people won't recognize. It's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala built our brains. But at many times, we may not recognize that it can actually have the pros and the cons, and it can be a fitna. And that's the same thing. In where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala emphasized حافظات للغيب, because as women, we tend to ventilate in a certain way that makes us feel better and talk about what our husbands do, what's happening at home, and then it becomes public property. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you, wait a minute, there's certain information that should not be public property. This zone is supposed to be within its area, because the second it goes out, then it becomes a form of chaos, bringing in a threat. Other people will start using that information, and then it becomes other people going within your zone. And that's when it starts bringing in more and more family problems, even though you could have been the person to just share some information and really be innocent about it. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, wait a minute. When we're talking about the zoning, we're talking about one who has the right to give an order. All right. 2, how far their order can reach. There's a certain zone to it. All right. 3, the relationship in how we maintain order within that zone. 4, when we're looking at from one zone to another, how you actually maintain certain rights and responsibilities. Are you guys with me here? So that's why when we're looking at these zones, let's look at it right there. I'm just going to delete some things, okay? When we're looking at these zones, let's look at them. Hold on, you guys. I'm just going to delete some things, okay? When we're looking at these zones, let's look at these right there. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Here we go. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, let's look at it. Let's put it right there. So we're looking at the center when in terms of defining values. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the center to define values. But the parents can also have their own values. The mom can say, well, within my home, within our premise, here are the laws for my home. All right. As long as they don't contradict the laws of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. She can actually do that. So here's number 1, values, redefining different things. Same thing. The family can actually have, the tribe can have its own value. And the country, every state, every county can also have its own laws. You can have every county can have its own laws, but then the laws, they would always go back to the Constitution. You can't have a law that can contradict the Constitution. All right. Even if it's there's the federal law. You guys know that? The federal law, you cannot contradict that. There are certain, same thing. When we're looking at parents' laws, family laws, etc., it doesn't mean, and this is really important. So not if your friend, for example, their parents have a certain rule within the household, it doesn't mean that your mom has to apply the same. Because as long as it doesn't contradict Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's laws, she can actually redefine what she thinks is important in order to bring structure. In order to bring structures. Is that haram? No, it would actually be haram to disobey those laws. Are you with me here? What's the evidence? وَأَطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَأَطِيعُوا الرَّسُولَ وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. And obey Allah, and obey the Prophet, and obey those that are in charge. In this situation, a parent. So following the law is actually part of being obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because it's in order to maintain structure. وَأُولِي الْأَمْرِ مِنْكُمْ. So what does that mean? Who's supposed to be the person to put in the law in a family? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الرِّجَالُ قَوْمٌ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ. The men are قَوَّمُونَ عَلَى النِّسَاءِ, are the ones to be in charge, in authority. You put in the word قَوَّمُونَ, and there's so many details for it. All right. So what is that meaning? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even for the wife. And then it said, فَالصَّالِحَاتُ قَانِتَاتٌ. What else? حَافِظَاتُ الْغَيْبِ. For women, some scholars actually said, فَالصَّالِحَات, the pious women, قَانِتَات, that they're قَانِتَات to their husbands. And other scholars said that they're قَانِتَات to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Regardless, in the end, it is that they're obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to the structure. Because the second that it goes off structure, it actually brings in a chaos. Let's go in. So we've got the values. All right. What else? We're talking about also the information, how much information is shared. Number 3, we're talking about the structure. And of course, the rights and responsibilities. Sorry, you guys, even though like you could see, it doesn't really write well, my screen, it's not so good. But the rights and responsibilities, all right, how we actually function, the rights and responsibilities, that's really when we're talking about the zone. All right. So what does this have to do with anything of what I was talking about? Which is why with this ayah, أَنْدَادًا يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. When we're talking about this ayah, is that yes, how do you recognize values? How do you recognize the information? How do you recognize the rights and responsibilities and the moralities of things? It's really supposed to be based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So for a kafir, look at this, you guys. For a kafir, the values, the information, the rights and responsibilities are actually not based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it's actually based on a different structure. Are you guys with me here? So the vision, the behavior is based on a different, it's based on a different core. And that's why when you actually look at the kuffar life, for example, whether it's wanting to drink or whether it's just living for the sake of entertainment, all that, why? Because the vision is actually based on desire. The vision is really based on just living for the sake of dunya. So once that is off, that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُحِبُّونَهُمْ كَحُبِّ اللَّهِ. What do? Well, they love others as if they really, as how a mu'min would love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَالَّذِينَ آمَنُوا أَشَدُّ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ. I think somebody is trying to ask a question. Okay, I think they're okay. Because I'm seeing that the sister is okay, I guess she's not within the group. She's asking a different question later on. All right. وَلَوْ يَرَى الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا إِذْ يَرَوْنَ الْعَذَابَ أَنَّ الْقُوَّةَ لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا. If those that had transgressed the limit, when they would see the torments of the Lord Almighty, that Allah Almighty has all the power to do what? all the power to punish. So why would he have all the power to punish? If he had all the power to punish, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told you right there in the ayah that he had all the power to put in a structure. If he has the power to make the structure, then he is the one that's capable of making the structure be outside of their structure. You know what that means? Let's do it again. Who created the structure? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The structure is supposed to bring what? System. The structure is supposed to bring in ease. The structure is but is every structure bringing in ease? Not always. Sometimes it makes a challenge, right? Sometimes it makes a challenge. But if you were to break the structure, because you thought it would be easier, which is easier, to cope or to just sit and relax? It's a lot easier to just sit and relax. Plus, what's going to happen? Later on, the consequence is going to look ugly. You're not going to have a job. If you don't want to cope getting a job, what's going to happen? Where you're going to end up struggling with something even far more worse than the coping that you would probably need to invest in getting a job. What's the consequence? You're going to end up coping, needing to suffer from probably homelessness, maybe no food, or maybe junk food, and you're going to suffer in different ways. So you choose your battle. What battle do you want to face? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, if you decided to not choose the structure, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, أَنَّ الْقُوَّةَ لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا. You decided to actually take a different battle. Well, the battle, you're actually in loss, because all the power is actually in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You wanted to choose that battle. وَأَنَّ الْقُوَّةَ لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا. And in the end, أَنَّ اللَّهَ شَدِيدُ الْعِقَابِ. So what is that actually taking us? That's taking us that the whole idea, when we're talking about morality and love, that love actually leads to deciding your behavior. As human beings, when we're talking about love deciding and determining your behavior, it's actually going to determine a lot of the different consequences. So what does that actually mean? It actually means that the core love is actually part of Aqidah. Why is it part of Aqidah? Because when you're talking about love, you're actually talking about what matter determines your vision, what matter determines your behavior, and what matter determines your focus and sincerity. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, speaking of focus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what did I just do? Speaking of focus, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was right there telling us in terms of focus, you have to let your focus be on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because in terms of consequence, the consequence is going to be far more than what you can handle. إِذْ تَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا. And that's when تَبَرَّأَ. Okay. I felt cute. Sorry, that was my son coming in. And okay. إِذْ تَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا. Yeah, even when I'm actually on Zoom doing classes, I would get these often. Okay, so at home, exactly. So if he's doing it in public, just think of what he would do more at home. Okay, إِذْ تَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا مِنَ الَّذِينَ اتَّبَعُوا. So what is that taking us? And let me first interpret that. إِذْ تَبَرَّأَ. تَبَرَّأَ actually means to be innocent from, all right, or to ostracize from. What is that meaning? تَبَرَّأَ الَّذِينَ اتُّبِعُوا. It's when those that were followed said that they were innocent. In other words, they disassociated themselves from those that followed them. And when they had seen the torments, and then so they would see the torments, and then تقطعت بهم الأسباب, and all the connections that connected those that were following from their followers, that all of a sudden disappeared. It vanished. It's not there anymore. So what is that actually taking us to? Is that, remember when we talked about love, all right? Love brings in a connection, and that's the connection that this ayah is actually referring to. The connection between the follower, the core, and the follower. The core and the different zones that surround it, all right? So this ayah is basically connecting when you actually follow somebody. When you follow somebody, that love, that connection, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us, well, you have to make sure that you review who you actually follow. So here's a question. Is it good to follow people? Do we follow people? Taqleed, that is. Scholars actually had differences of opinions on what type of following we're talking about. So what does that mean? You can be following someone with haram things, with wrong things, right? And you can be following someone like al-ulama. Do you necessarily know their evidence on every matter? You don't know their evidence on every matter. And that's taqleed. But what that ayah is referring to is following in haram. And most people, they would actually follow trends, follow in what they eat, what they wear, what they behave in, what they entertain themselves in, the way they talk even. There are certain words, they become trendy, all right? Even in actions, you know, all these different things without them recognizing where did this really start from? The dab, the whatever. They don't even know where, or sometimes they will know where it came from, but then it becomes, yeah, I'm just going to imitate, mimic, and it becomes a trend. So Islam was actually against in warning people from following a trend. That's why, for example, the piercing, many times people would answer, or scholars would answer the piercing and just say halal haram, and just look at it from one angle, which is, yeah, you're inserting something in your body. Is that halal or haram? That's actually a wrong answer. The concept is not inserting something in the body. That's not why people are doing piercing. The whole idea about piercing is an issue of ittiba', is an issue of feeling a part of something. And to actually answer the question based on it's inserting, am I allowed to insert for the reason of beautification, is actually a wrong answer. Which is why Tahir ibn Ashur, a Tunisian scholar, and he actually went farther and very smart in his answer. Very, very smart in his answer. And he said regarding the hadith, لعن الله النامصة والمتنمصة الفالجة والمتفلجة. And if you look at that hadith, he said that what combines, whether in nams or whether it was التفلج الأسنان, which basically means to blade the teeth in a certain way, or even tattooing, he said what combines the three is really that it was a trend. It was a trend to mimic the women that were doing such a behavior in order to appear in a certain way. So what does that actually mean? It was to mimic fisq. It was to mimic that you are not within a structure. It was to give a sign for the men, at least within that trend, in order to say, I'm basically out of structure. So therefore, I can be available. All right. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually says for the women, Ya ayyuhan nabi. And what was it for? It's actually, Ya ayyuhan nabi, قل لأزواجك وبناتك ونساء المؤمنين. What about them? يدنين عليهن من عليكم السلام ورحمة الله. Just inside that room. That they should lower their garments. But then it continues, ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين. If you connect it with the hadith, and how Tahir ibn Ashur understood it deeply, the ayah says, ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن, so that they would be recognized. That's to bring in a better a recognition. فلا يؤذين, so that they won't be harmed. What does that have to do with anything? That's in order to keep a certain recognition of identity. What is the identity? That the man recognizes who? What man? The men that have diseases in their hearts, they would recognize that this is a woman of iffa. This is a woman of bashfulness. This is a woman of identity. This is a woman of structure. This is a woman of principle. Now, going back to the piercing part. When you look at piercing within our system, even within the non-Muslim system, they would consider that piercing is a form of being ghetto. It's a form of being liberal. It's a representation of wanting to fit in. And therefore, piercing would actually be haram. Piercing would actually be haram. Why? Because it contradicts the principle of the whole idea of hijab. When you look at piercing, it goes far beyond than just inserting something. There's a whole, remember the vertebra that we talked about? There's a whole vertebra. There's a legal maxim, the whole legal maxim. ذلك أدنى أن يعرفن فلا يؤذين. It's not only to be harmed by men, but it's also the ayah. If you can continue within that page, the ayah was ordering for lowering the gaze, and the ayah was ordering also for a certain type of فلا تخضعن بالقول فيطمع الذي في قلبه مرض وقلنا قولا معروفا. And then it continues, lowering the gaze. ذلك إيش أزكى. Talks about purification. So when we talk about the way she dresses, the way she talks, the way she walks, the way she looks at things, all these different things are not an issue of just men, which is why the ayah was making it clear that it's azka for who? For your hearts and their hearts. The whole issue was in order to bring about a purification in the heart. That's the whole idea of hijab. That's the whole idea of the akhlaq of hijab. And that's the whole idea of the whole concept of what it means to practice tazkiyah. So if somebody wants to answer the question about tattooing or even what's it called, or even piercing, without putting it within the context that it is in within the society today, the qaida fiqhiyya says, there's a general fiqhi rule, الحكم على الشيء فرع عن تصوره. To give a rule, it really branches out based on the context that it comes from. The context actually stems from a very important structure. And to give a ruling, if you don't understand the whole structure, the whole context of it, then the ruling is really going to be broken from the actual core of things. What does that have to do with any of what we're saying? If تبرأ الذين اتبعوا من الذين اتبعوا, that this ayah, if تبرأ الذين, scholars actually had differences of opinions. Is this referring to the Yahud? Is this referring to Bani Israel? Al-Qurtubi says, well, this is referring to anyone. This is a general العبرة بعموم اللفظ لا بخصوص السبب. The general idea is really based on the wording, the comprehensiveness within that statement, and not in particular to what it was revealed for. And what is that supposed to mean? This is actually recognizing every single one that is following and putting in some type of a following without recognizing why are they doing this? For what? And changing their principle without recognizing what it's based on. Why? Because the vision was based on mere following. The vision, it wasn't really based on the consequence of the behavior. It wasn't based on, was it right, wrong, how does it harm, how does it not harm? It was just based on just wanting to fit in. Just wanting to fit in. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us that fitting in idea, get it out. A Muslim should not do any behavior just for the sake of fitting in. In fact, which is why scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether even in Islam, whether I can actually follow the fatwa without knowing all the details in terms of evidences. They had differences of opinions on that. So what does that actually mean? For example, a sister, I'm not sure, is niqab fard? Should I have to cover my face and not cover my face? What's the whole debate on that? Scholars had differences of opinions, but the sister doesn't really know what they debated about in the whole opinion. So she just says, you know, I'll just take your word for it. You did the research. All right. Can somebody just do that? Or do they actually have to do the job and actually research the evidences? That's where the differences of opinions between scholars actually took place in. Oh, alaikum salam. Hey, look at you, mashallah. Because I'm recording, we'll see, inshallah. تبرأ الذين اتبعوا من الذين اتبعوا ورأوا العذاب وقال الذين اتبعوا لو أن لنا كرة فنتبرأ منهم. Then what happens? Those that had followed, when they had seen that those that they had followed are now disassociating themselves from the people, their own followers. In other words, the celebrities are right now saying, we have nothing to do with our fans. What happens? The fans were spending so much time in mimicking those celebrities. Now the celebrities are saying, we have nothing to do with you. They don't even care about you. So what happens? The fans, قال الذين اتبعوا لو أن لنا كرة فنتبرأ منهم. They said, if only we had a second chance and we would actually disassociate ourselves from them, just like they had disassociated themselves from us. كذلك يريهم الله أعمالهم حسرات عليهم. Now this is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's the first part of seeing the remorse, of how what they had done right before their eyes, all the actions, when the person that they were basically considering as a celebrity is right now given up on them. All the actions that they had invested in getting some kind of advancement, they recognized all of a sudden that they didn't get any advancements. That's number one. Number two, these celebrities, they gave up on them. And we see that many, many, many times. It's really, I don't understand the celebrity thing. I really find it, I'll use the word stupid. I really find it the stupidest thing that anyone would do is to follow a celebrity when these celebrities, wallahi, they do not deserve anything because they are empty, especially people like Lady Gaga. غبية. غبية, very stupid. غبية. What is going on with people? غبية. And yet people would think, yeah, I'm trying to follow and mimic somebody. Allah al-Musta'an. I just don't get it. Alhamdulillah, I was never a person that followed any celebrities. يا أيها الناس كلوا مما في الأرض حلالا طيبا. What does that actually take us into? That actually takes us, so let's look at it. You guys, this is actually talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then this is talking about what makes love and what connects you between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is love. And then this is actually eliminating and limiting what it means to follow and how they would end up actually giving up on you. But then this is actually talking about food. What does food have to do with this? Is it just talking about food? Well, let's see. All right, let's look at this. You see, the Prophet ﷺ actually says, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمن ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. What does that mean? Don't be friends but with a believer. And don't share food but with somebody that has taqwa. What does that mean? I shouldn't be sharing with my kafir neighbor? No. This is not what it's talking about. Not at all. I know I can see eyes like fanatic right now, ready to bash their neighbor. No. That's not what it's saying. لا تصاحب actually means a person that you spend your day-to-day life with. A person that you actually live and you're constantly putting in time and investing time. Why لا تصاحب إلا مؤمن? The Prophet ﷺ in another hadith said that there are 7 that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would shade his shade up above them. And from them, he said, 2 men that loved themselves, that loved each other for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Where do they go? He said they would come join in the masjid and they would leave together outside of the masjid. What is that telling us? That they were actually gathering in La ilaha illallah. They were gathering with what? With hubbillah, the love for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's why, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمن. When we're talking about تصاحب, this is actually talking about somebody that you spend time with, someone that you engage with, someone that you share your problems with, someone that you learn from, someone that you seek advice from, someone that you spend hours and hours with. The Prophet ﷺ, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمن. Only a believer. Because the second you make friends with someone else, they're going to start rubbing off on you. They're going to start having their influence on you. So the Prophet said, لا تصاحب إلا مؤمن. Only be friends with a mu'min. ولا يأكل طعامك إلا تقي. This is not saying don't share food with a non-Muslim, but this is actually telling you your day-to-day life, if you needed to eat with someone, why does it talk about eating with someone? Because when you eat with someone, you're creating a relationship. When you're eating with someone, that means you're spending time, you're talking, you're sharing a meal, you're sharing more than just the materialistic part of a meal. You're sharing ruh. You're sharing a spirit. You're sharing a spirit. And that's why the ayah, يا أيها الناس كلوا مما في الأرض حلالا طيبا. So when it comes to food, you need to recognize a number of different things. Number one, comes from a halal source, whether halal money or whether it in itself is actually halal to consume. It's number one. طيبة, all right, طيبة is basically telling you halal to consume. ولا تتبع خطوات الشيطان. What is that? ولا تتبع خطوات الشيطان. لا تتبع خطوات الشيطان. Don't follow the footsteps of shaitan. Why did it come after food? Let's look at the hadith in order to try to scrutinize why did it talk about food? Do we find anywhere in the sunnah where it correlated behavior with food? Yes, we do. In fact, there are actually a number of different ahadith that correlated behavior with food. And that's exactly the same thing here, where it correlated behavior with food. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ actually says, يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج. He's talking to the young men. Guys, if you're capable of getting married, then scholars have differences of opinions on whether al-ba'a means the ability to be intimate or whether al-ba'a means the ability to spend on, basically have the expenses, be able to cover the expenses for marriage. فليتزوج, let them get married. And then he continues, and whoever can, ومن لم يستطع فعليه بالصوم. And if you can't get married, then use fasting as a way. فإنه له وجاء. The Prophet ﷺ said in the hadith, then use fasting as a coping method in order to help you cope with your desires. فإنه له وجاء, because it will control and tame his desire. What does it do? I'm not going to go into details of how food produces semen and all these different things. I'm not going to discuss that part of it. But the most important thing is that how this hadith correlated between a person's sexual activity, behavior, and between their fast. Let's look into another ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says about siyam. يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامُ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِنْ قَبْلِكُم. But then what does it continue? لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. How did it correlate with what? Correlated siyam with having taqwa, religious integrity. What is taqwa related to? It's related to behavior. Related to behavior. So now we could say siyam, food, and what you consume. It's not only abstaining from food, but it's also what you consume. What you consume, how much you consume, even the amount. Are you taking more than the amount you should be eating? How much you eat is going to have a lot of impact on you learning how to control not the amount only, but learning how to control your behavior, being able to get up. If you're over consuming and you're within the obesity level, you got to work out. Working out is not an issue of, yeah, it's just to look good and have the right beach body. It's not an issue of beach body. They think of dunya, they think of beach body, but you think of salah body. You think of salah body. They think of beach body because to them, getting a beach body actually means getting the guys whistling at their body. But you think of not a beach body. You think of salah body, being able to do your activities. Being able to do your activities. So when we look at halalan tayyiba, we're looking at the amount. We're also, that's why the Prophet ﷺ, the first bid'ah, Sayyidah Aisha says, was actually obesity. Sunnah. Obesity. That was the first bid'ah. They didn't recognize it. They didn't have that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. People were just eating small amounts. That was the first bid'ah. They were eating an amount that was right for what a believer consumes. And that's why she called it a bid'ah. Even the bid'ah is supposed to be in the deen. But she regarded that eating is actually the core of deen anyways. Eating and what you eat. If you look at the Prophet ﷺ, the ahadith that related to food are actually numerous. The ayat that related to food are actually numerous. So let's continue. And that's why the ayah says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ, and don't follow the paths of shaitan. إِنَّهُ لَكُمْ عَدُوٌ مُبِينٌ. So who you eat with, what you eat, and the amount of food that you eat, all that is going to affect your behavior. Yesterday, a sister was calling me, and she was telling me of different desires or different things that she's not able to work on. And I said, food, cut down on the food, go and work out. Because once you start working out doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in a mixed settings. Do what you need to do. Run around the park by all means. Do it at home. Right now, you've got all these videos. Working out is actually part of your deen. Its body is the healthy body produces the ability to actually even do your dhikr and your ibadah. Working out is important. The Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith about working, that a strong body is better than a weak body. المؤمن القوي خير وأحب إلى الله من المؤمن الضعيف. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a strong believer, whether we're talking about strong believer in terms of strong in their faith, or whether we're talking about strong believers strong in their body. Working on it. Let's continue. إنه لكم عدو مبين. Who? Shaitan. إنه لكم عدو مبين. He is an enemy. Why is that even needed to recognize? Wasn't that recognized a number of different times? Well, that's in order to explain to you that Shaitan has a number of different steps. What are those steps? The steps are the major sins and the minor sins. You may not recognize. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in terms of wajibat, the wajib is in the middle. The sunnah is to preserve the wajib. All right? The sunnah is to preserve the wajib. And then there are all those different things. Those are, you can consider it the sunnah ghir mu'akkada, you can consider it so forth. All right, same thing, which is why the Prophet ﷺ actually said, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةِ بِالْمَكَارِهِ. Al-Jannah was surrounded with things that people would hate. Right? وَحُفَّتِ النَّارِ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. Versus hellfire was actually حُفَّت. حُفَّت actually means it's covered. It's surrounded by, النار is surrounded by shahawat, things that you would adore. What are the things that you would adore? The different major and minor sins, the different desires. They're surrounding hellfire. So khutuwat al-shaitan are basically the things that shaitan would want to lead you to this. إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُكُمْ بِالسُّوءِ وَالْفَحْشَاءِ. So let's put it here, colon. What are khutuwat al-shaitan? So the ayah continues with after this colon and says, oh, he orders. I want you to look at this word orders. إِنَّمَا يَأْمُرُكُمْ. But don't we hate orders? Well, without you recognizing, shaitan is actually giving you orders. Without you recognizing, let's look at it. We were talking about piercing earlier. When we're talking about piercing as an example, it's actually hard on people to actually pierce different body parts, and sometimes the most sensitive areas. Piercing a nipple, for God's sake. Piercing a tongue, piercing a lip. Those are the most sensitive areas. The stomach, I don't know how sensitive that is, but when we're talking about the most sensitive areas and piercing the most sensitive areas, you know, the areas that tend to have the
Nerves.
exactly the nerves, the tongue, the lips, maybe the nose is probably the least in terms of pain, but to actually pierce the most sensitive areas, to endure all the pain. What is that? Ya'murukum, he ordered them, but then they would be going for it despite all the pain.
Who orders them, Shaitan?
Shaitan orders them, but it doesn't have to be the official shaitan. It can be the disguised human shaitan. But it's given to them and presented to them in a way that it would give them some form of power, some form of beautification. Many times people will tell me, it just makes me feel good. It just makes me feel good. What do they mean by makes them feel good? Just makes them feel like they're a part of a group. It makes you feel good to be a part of what group? Shaitan group. Really? That you recognize it. إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء. What is the difference between السوء and الفحشاء? Let's look at it right there. إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء. السوء, isn't it supposed to be the same as الفحشاء? Well, scholars actually had differences of opinions on السوء والفحشاء. The first opinion is that السوء is supposed to be the minor sins. الفحشاء are the major sins. Su is minor sins. Fahsha is major sins. Second opinion is su are the sins that don't have an assigned punishment in the Quran or Sunnah. Al-fahsha is what has an assigned punishment. So what does that mean? Some of the sins, Islam actually assigned a certain punishment for them. Zina, flogging, 100 lashes for somebody that is not married before, and for someone that has been married before, stoning till death.
If you've married before,
Mm-hmm.
you stone until death.
Mm-hmm.
But if you've not been married, you.
Mm-hmm. But isn't that against human rights?
What human rights?
What human rights? Isn't that against human rights? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells you, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the core of defining human rights.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any country that actually...
Raise your voice.
Is there any country, a Muslim country, that actually...
Flogs?
Yeah, follows that.
I know Sultan, what is that country? It's what the Brunei does that. I know that, I think Indonesia, in some areas, Bande Aceh or something like that, they also do that.
They have
Philippines, I think, does not, walaikum assalam wa rahmatullah, not necessarily in detail, but some of the things. I know Saudi, but I would say it's more in Saudi, it's very biased in many ways. So not on the rich, but only on the poor. All right.
yeah.
Yeah. Also in Somalia too. Okay. So in Islam, you don't differentiate between the rich and the poor. But in the end, is that when we actually talk about flogging, or when we talk about, even if they want to say against human rights, okay, who's defining human rights? Who defines whether a lethal injection is more merciful than actually to bring about the death to someone by using, for example, an execution? Why did you think that a lethal injection was somehow merciful? Did you even try death to know? You never tried it. So even within the most let's say, advanced societies, or so they want to claim. Okay. Execution is actually part of the justice system, right? It's there. But then who decides when it's okay to go beyond human rights and when it's not, even though they're the ones that actually define human rights? So Islam tells you, wait a minute. When it comes to the whole system of even punishment and criminal law in Islam, even though that's a very small area in Islam, within the legal system within Islam, but Islam considers that there are certain, remember the zoning that we did? Islam considers that one, human life, let's look at it. Let's put those zones again, okay? I'm going to zoom out for a little bit, all right? Let's look at those zones. You've got zones, you've got human life, the deen, first the deen, two, human life, the nafs, got deen, nafs, aql, mind, or some actually considered ird, okay, chastity and family, and mal. Okay, here we go. All right, so what is that? If somebody goes and trespasses, even if we're talking about the deen, so if for the deen, that's a different detail. But for the deen, if a person were to actually attack the deen, that's basically attacking the system that is that really is putting the structure of the whole vision. Even in a country like the US, if you were to actually promote communism, you will actually be stripped away from your your citizenship, because that would be considered treason. All right. Even if you're to apply for the green card, they will ask you if you had ever supported the Nazis and all these different things. I don't know why the white supremacists are not considered so, but whatever. All right. You'll be asked these questions. Have you ever worked for, all these different questions, all right? But in the end, is that why? Because it considers that, hey, have you ever worked and given information for, any group and committed, what is that called? All these different things, because it basically considers it as a form of treason, because that's what the foundation of the country. And that's why even the country like the US, all right, what do we say? We basically consider democracy, consider the Constitution, the founding fathers, and all right, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, right? The republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, right? All that. It's basically the foundation of the government. You go against that, you're basically committing treason. So for Islam tells you, well, wait a minute, you go against Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're committing treason. You're right there going against the structure of what the country is founded on. What is that? Quran and Sunnah is the Constitution. So once you actually openly you go against that, then find yourself a different place. Or if you're announcing it to, in other words, cause treason to the founding part of the government, they're going to deal with you differently. The nafs, you go and start attacking people's lives, then the government is going to tell you then your life for attacking people's life is becoming really the government's property. Just like, for example, the government here, it would consider, hey, if you're a serial killer, then we're going to deal with you differently. The government would then intervene and say, we have the right to end your life because you started ending people's lives. You bring in chaos. Let's go for another thing. Same thing. Islam considers the founding structure of what makes community, what makes government, what makes country is really family. And regarded that any attack on the holy structure of family is attack on people. is attack on people's lives. And which is why Islam regarded that zina, for someone that has never been married before, is flogging 100 lashes. So why not just imprison them? Why attack their body? Corporal punishment. So here's the thing, is that corporal punishment is not necessarily in Islam considered as always necessarily against human rights, because Islam would only, human body is so sacred in Islam that only when the person had attacked other people's sacred spaces will the government intervene and actually say, it's time that we would give you a corporal punishment in order to bring about a more of an attentive and attention to make sure that you respect people's boundaries, that you respect people's rights. And it's only in specific cases when, one, you had trespassed people's properties or trespassed people's privacies, which is in zina. So in Islam, a person's body is supposed to be sacred, which is why it's actually haram to harm your body, whether in killing yourself or killing others, or whether in attacking someone, or even because you got angry and you started just hurting yourself. That's totally haram in Islam.
Even smoking, right?
Even smoking. It's totally haram to harm your body or harm someone else's body. And the only one that can actually do any corporal punishment is really the government, and in only limited instances when that person had trespassed people's sacred spaces. Sacred spaces, their space for their property, their space for the protection of their family and chastity and their life. So that's when Islam would say, no, yes, it's sacred, but people's rights, these rights are so sacred that we're going to let you recognize that by the government going beyond your sacred space, which is your body. When you did not learn a lesson and maintain people's sacred spaces, that's when the government is going to intervene and go into your sacred space. That's actually applied even in Western law. Doesn't the government actually put a lethal injection or even give itself the right to imprison someone for many, many, many years? Isn't that harming? Why do we separate between harming somebody's body and putting them and think that it's not against human rights by incarcerating them for so many years? Islam tells you, no, give them a chance to live. They stole something. Give them a chance to live. Give them, instead of incarcerating them for so many years, no, give them a punishment that will be just, we would have to make sure that transgression did happen, that crime did happen. And once we are sure of it, then we would basically eliminate their activity by eliminating certain parts of what caused that activity. But then we would give them a chance to live. Give them a chance to live. Give them that flog, or give them that punishment, and then let them go on. But if you're incarcerating somebody for so many years for robbing a bank, for example, 30 years, 20 years, it depends if you're black or white. That's going to determine how long you stay in there. It's real.
That happens these days all the time. people get put in jail for years and years just for stealing others.
Yep. And then what happens? And then you could see the whole justice system of being very corrupt. It's another form of slavery to discover that it was really a form of slavery in order to incarcerate the blacks and put them and making them work for stamps. System.
But if their hand is cut off and they steal again, and then the other hand is cut off.
Trust me, that rarely happened within Islamic history. That only happened 6 times. 6 times. We're talking about how many years? We're talking about almost 1,300 years. No one would dare do it.
People are scared.
People are scared. If you know that there is a justice system that's really going to track you and hunt you down, you're going to be really scared. You're going to think twice before you would even think of dare to do such a thing. But here's the thing. When you look at the prison system is actually bringing in more people in prison. It's keeping them inside the prison. The people that have a history of being in prison are more likely to go back, which tells you the prison system is a failure. They've gotten so used to it. In fact, you go in there, and I do chaplaincy work in prisons. You can't really tell the difference between a police officer and the other people, except in the garment. But the language is really low. The language is really low. And when you speak in that language and you behave in that way, think of the structure. It affects your mind, it affects your vision, it affects your behavior. The police officer is really different just because of their garment, really. But the language is really the same. The language is really the same. It's just that person got caught and the other person didn't get caught. The other person got away with it because of their badge. That's basically it. اللهم صل. إنما يأمركم بالسوء والفحشاء وأن تقولوا على الله ما لا تعلمون. So the other opinion between scholars is that بالسوء والفحشاء, السوء is basically, and الفحشاء, they regarded it as that it is actually put together. And that السوء والفحشاء, they regarded that السوء والفحشاء, when these two words are correlated, that it's actually referring to zina, adultery or fornication. Referred to adultery or fornication. وَأَن تَقُولُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ مَا لَا تَعْلَمُونَ, and that you would say things on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of what you don't know of. So how did they correlate it with su'i wal fahsha and actually correlate it with zina? Remember the hadith that we actually said earlier in where su'i wal fahsha, and that it relates to zina and the food, the Prophet sallallahu يا معشر الشباب من استطاع منكم الباءة فليتزوج, etc. And if you cannot, then fast, for that protects you. All right. So that's one way. And there are a number of different hadith or ayat that actually correlated when they're actually two together. It's actually referring to zina, fornication, or adultery. وإذا قيل لهم اتبعوا ما أنزل الله قالوا بل نتبع ما ألفينا عليه آباءنا أولو كان آباؤهم لا يعقلون شيئا ولا يهتدون. Let me translate that in the surface translation. And if they are told to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed, they would say, we will just follow what we had found our forefathers and our ancestors doing. And then the response to that, did their forefathers and their ancestors actually not comprehend with what they were doing, and they were not following guidance? What is that supposed to be meaning here? This is going back when it comes to, remember what we talked about in terms of 1, recognizing the vision, 2, and then the vision actually brings in a relationship with food, eating, drinking, following. All right. So here we go. So this ayah is now scrutinizing this relationship. Before it was scrutinizing the relationship in terms of following, celebrity, and the fans. How do we examine these two, the relationship? And then put them together. How do you actually make it these two? And what brings in a relationship is really food and behavior. You see it right before? So do we do it again? You guys recognize it? I can see faces like, what are we talking about here? Let's do it right there. Okay. So what puts in, here we go. What puts in the first one? The relationship is really love. What builds with the love? It's really the food and the different behaviors, right? You make a relationship. What do you do with the relationship? How do you hang out with this relationship? You eat, drink, there's a certain behavior, we engage, etc. So this area goes farther in that relationship and what actually is the technical side of it. So then it continues to actually, let's say, scrutinize and dissect the core of that, which is the vision. All right. So after it talked about, because most people are not mature enough to recognize the vision of the idea, that is the vision of what makes a follower and what makes a celebrity. Most people, they just follow. They don't even recognize of what basis did the celebrity create an idea from. Most people, they just follow. Are you with me here? Most people just follow. So the ayah wanted to tell them, well, I want you to look at right there, the idea of the celebrity and the fan. Those people are going to disassociate themselves from you. And then what you had actually thought was the connector that was keeping you in connection, you thought it was there. Now it's going to get disconnected. Because anyways, they disassociated themselves from you. So then the ayah continues to actually explain khutuwat al-shaitan, the path of shaitan that makes the follower and the celebrity together is really a lot of the different moments that combines them during eating, drinking, and a lot of the different behaviors. All right. So that's what combines them together. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just telling you, well, listen. And that's why we brought the hadith that let's it's basically telling you, hey, when you're talking about relationship and creating relationships with people, you need to scrutinize when and who you spend your moments with and how much you're spending time and who is that person and where are you guys heading to? Where do you guys usually meet? Do you usually meet at a masjid, at a halaqah, or are you meeting elsewhere? So those are the areas that you want to recognize. So then the ayah, because most people are not mature to scrutinize and dissect what creates a relationship, and that isn't until a person is mature that they would recognize that, which is to recognize the main core of the vision. So that's why the ayah then, when it actually dissected, or let me say totally eliminated and totally scrutinized, and let's call it basically, what is the word that I could use? It basically made it easy. And in other words, it separated the ideas and made it clear for you. That's when the ayah said, well, let's go farther. Since we had created an understanding and where you recognize that these people will not be there for you, let's look at the vision that they actually are based on. The vision that they are based on is that most of these people, if they were told to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed, they would just say, well, we would follow what our ancestors had come with. Now, this is not exclusively speaking about just the ancestors, but this is talking about the majority of the people. The majority of the people will just follow just for the sake of following and not necessarily understand why they're doing such a behavior. They're just doing it for the sake of doing a behavior. They're just doing it to fit in. All right. They're just doing it because everybody else is doing it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling them, أَوَلَوْ كَانَ آبَاؤُهُمْ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. Now, this is not only talking about the fathers. Yes, the ayah is actually talking about the fathers because that was the argument that the pagan Arab were putting forward. The pagan Arab were concerned, well, we're going to live a legacy. And the legacy that we're living is the legacy that our ancestors were doing. We're going to preserve their legacy. We're going to build on it because for sure they must have had a better experiment, a better experience, and therefore they knew what they were doing. That's what they assumed. So the ayah says, well, they didn't even لا يعقلون شيئا. They didn't even recognize. They couldn't even comprehend the behavior of what they were doing. They were just doing things. They just mimicked others, and then they started building on it, and they thought it was the right thing. وَلَا يَهْتَدُونَ. So what is that trying to tell us? That before you actually, which is really equivalent to the ayah in Surah An-Najm, what do they say? That they would say that they would follow يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَىٰ. That they would follow speculation. يَتَّبِعُونَ إِلَّا الظَّنَّ وَمَا تَهْوَى الْأَنفُسُ. And what their desires would basically motivate them to do. وَلَقَدْ جَاءَهُم مِّن رَّبِّهِمُ الْهُدَىٰ. And their Lord Almighty brought them the guidance. So where's that ayah taking them to? So what do? They follow their desires. And here's the لا يعقلون. الظن, the speculation that they were actually doing is that they were actually really not even following the logic. So then the ayah says they were not even following wahy. Here's one very important thing. A little off. Al-Ghazali, bear with me, it's a little off. Al-Ghazali was living in Baghdad. Al-Ghazali was an orphan. Al-Ghazali had nowhere to be in but the orphanage. But in orphanage, that orphanage had rules. In order to be part of the orphanage, you have to be part of the school system. If you're not part of the school system, you don't get to stay in the orphanage. Al-Ghazali and his brother had nowhere to go. Both of his parents had died. So Al-Ghazali, in order to basically find a home, find food, he basically decided to join the orphanage. Al-Ghazali says, we had sought knowledge for other than the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but knowledge refused but to be for the sake of Allah. Al-Ghazali continues within the education system, within the Nizamiya school. In Nizamiya school, basically has from elementary, secondary, and then it goes into the paths and the paths until you become a grand scholar. Well, Al-Ghazali kept on going up in the system until he had actually become the principal for the whole school. When we speak of Al-Ghazali, by the way, we're actually talking about one of the most intelligent personnels ever to live on the face of earth. In fact, even if you are to study philosophy in Western universities, Al-Ghazali himself just has a special place for Al-Ghazali. One of my professors actually did his PhD just on the epistemology of Al-Ghazali in Boston University in Massachusetts. Just on Al-Ghazali, just on his epistemology. Al-Ghazali, even though he managed to be successful and became the head of the school, Al-Ghazali went through a moment of what he had called a moment of dalal. A moment of dalal. And What is dalal? Dalal is, you can call it confusion, you can call it loss, you can call it, was it hypothetical? Well, Al-Ghazali actually decided to leave the position in a Nizamiya school, isolate himself from people, totally isolate himself from people. You can call it a moment of mental illness. Al-Ghazali, the scholar, one of the main scholars of the Shafi'i madhab, one of the main scholars in falsafa, in philosophy, one of the main scholars in fiqh, one of the main scholars in mustasfa min al-usul. He wrote one of the main books of usul al-fiqh, and the list goes on and on. Gets a mental illness. Yes. He goes through a moment of mental illness. What does he do? He leaves not only the school, but leaves the entire country of Iraq and goes to Al-Quds, stays there for 4 years, isolating himself from people. And then he wrote his book. It's called Al-Munqidh min al-Dalal, the Savior from Confusion. And in that book, there's something very interesting that he talks about, which is, now scholars had differences of opinions on whether that was a hypothetical argument that he was laying out or not. But in the end, is that he says that he was in search of what can actually make the basis of truth. In other words, what can we be sure? You know, with that philosopher, he says, I think, therefore I am. Right? He said, I think, therefore I am. You guys know that? Come on. Does anybody know it? You guys don't know it? Know it. All right. So what is that idea supposed to be saying? It's like, what can, in order for me to prove something is real, I need to have another real thing that is supposed to be the basis for knowledge. I have to stand on something. You can't stand in the middle of the air like that. So Al-Ghazali said, and he would think of so many different things, and then he came up to a final thing, and he said, it wasn't that he was living in doubt. He didn't doubt Islam. He was trying to find, what can I be so sure of to make it as the base for ma'rifah, for knowledge. And he said, it was really nurun qadhafahu Allah fi qalbi. It was just a light that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put in my heart. And what is what? Which is al-wahy. It's not al-wahy that he had a revelation and an angel come down to him, but it's really that just the nur, just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had just given him that enlightenment. And that's the same thing. SubhanAllah, if the person is not actually on hidayah, if they're not on guidance, they're really going to base things based on speculation, and they're going to be just like the ayah said in Surah Taha. What is that? وَمَنْ أَعْرَضَ عَنْ ذِكْرِي فَإِنَّ لَهُ مَعِيشَةً ضَنْكًا وَنَحْشُرُهُ يَوْمَ الْقِيَامَةِ أَعْمَى قال رب لما حشرتني أعمى وقد كنت بصيرا قال كذلك أتتك آياتنا فنسيتها وكذلك اليوم تنسى. What does it say? And whoever turns their back on the words of the Lord Almighty, then their life is going to be a life of danka, a life of confusion, a life of unsettlement, imbalance, a life where you're just going left and right and lost in your life. Then on Judgment Day, they're going to be resurrected blind. And they would say, why did you resurrect me blind when I was capable of seeing? And he said, that's how you got the verses of the Lord Almighty, but you had forgotten it. But wait a minute, if he had forgotten it, he should have been punished with amnesia. But no, أتتك آن آياتنا فنسيتها. You didn't recognize it because there is a visual dhikr. You lost the vision of how you recognize right from wrong. You lost the vision of recognition, the tool to help you recognize. And that's why the behavior was off track. The behavior was off track. So here, وَمَثَلُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, how does it relate to it? It says, well, the example of those that had turned away, that had left, or those that had turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, كَمَثَلِ الَّذِي يَنْعِقُ بِمَا لَا يَسْمَعُ إِلَّا دُعَاءً وَنِدَاءً. This is not talking about that the people that are in disbelief, that they're the ones that are calling out. But this is talking about that when you actually call out, all they would hear, بِمَا لَا يَسْمَعُ إِلَّا دُعَاءً وَنِدَاءً. They're exactly like the shepherd who would yell out certain noises to caution the sheep, but the sheep will not understand what the shepherd is calling. They will just hear it as noise. It becomes white noise to them. White noise, that's it. They don't even recognize it. And that's why when you look at, and by the way, it's really strange, this is a little bit off track. When I was young, we actually had a farm. And in the farm, we had 60 heads of sheep almost, a cow, 6 horses almost, 120 pigeons almost 25, 30 rabbits. Yeah, we had a lot of things. And the sheep, it's really strange, you can recognize with animals, you can recognize that even with animals, they would recognize sound. You play a flute and the sheep they would be really enjoying the flute. You yell out, and what do? They basically pay attention and turn around. You would tell a horse, chit, 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 chit. They would recognize time to drink. It depends on what you train the horse in. It's not Arabic language to tell them that, but it depends on what you train the horse to recognize. It's water time. Got you some water. It's time for food. It's time for this. They would recognize the sound. Even though you're not talking to them, but they can recognize sound. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, they recognize the sound, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, those that are in disbelief, what do? They don't recognize, لا يعقلون. They don't understand and comprehend what you're saying, but what they hear is just dua and nida. They just hear you shouting. They just hear you speaking. It becomes like white noise, but they cannot comprehend what you're saying. You're trying to bring about the idea, the rationality, but then it becomes like white noise. What is that telling you? That not always is it that you're not making an argument, you're not making a sound argument. Sometimes it's that they don't want to hear you, they don't want to hear themselves. Do I give up on da'wah? Don't give up on da'wah. Sometimes they'll hear it. You have to do your responsibility. In the end, يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. But wasn't it talking about food earlier? Can you close the door? Wasn't it talking about food earlier? Can you close the door, Sanya? You can see they're excited. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. By the way, it's not wrong to bring the kids to the masjid. That's what will connect them to the masjid. Even if they interrupt my class, they will actually get connected with the masjid until they break the walls. Then they'll disconnect the masjid. What on earth did they just throw? Well, I mean, the walls, you guys, are just sheetrock, so don't think that the kids bring in bulldozers. At least I hope they're not. كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, oh you who believe, كلوا من طيبات ما رزقناكم. Let's compare it with the ayah that was before, okay? We need to compare those ayat because let's see the difference, all right? The difference is, number one, is that this ayah was saying, Ya ayyuhan nas. It was talking to all the people. This ayah was actually saying, Ya ayyuhal ladhina amanu. What's the difference between this discourse and that discourse? Ya ayyuhan nas is talking to all the people. And when the ayah is talking, Ya ayyuhan nas, it would be a Meccan ayah. It would be a Meccan ayah. What does a Meccan ayah actually mean? It means it was revealed in Mecca. A Madani ayah would be the one, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. It would be an ayah that was revealed in Medina. Why? Because it was basically during the time where there was a difference. There was a believer, there was a munafiq, there was a hypocrite. There were these different groups. So, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu. كلوا من طيبات. Notice the difference. This one was saying حلالا طيبا. This one was saying طيبات ما رزقناكم واشكروا الله. Look at the difference, you guys. Let's look at, let me take this ayah up a little more, okay? And just recognize it, okay? Recognize those differences. So this ayah, this is Meccan ayah. This is the Madani ayah. This was revealed in Medina. So we're looking at a couple years difference, okay? This one is halalan tayyiban. I was telling you there are certain things that are halal, and eat what is actually tayyib, what's actually good, made for you to eat. This one, ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, kulu min tayyibati ma razaqnakum. Eat from the tayyibat, from the good things, and this is referring to halal, of course. What was given to you. Ma razaqnakum. And then here, ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان. People, it was when it was talking to people in Mecca, and don't follow the path and the footsteps of shaitan. But for a believer, no, you go up in your level. وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا خُطُوَاتِ الشَّيْطَانِ. That's like when a person just converts to Islam, you're taking them baby steps. Don't take them all the way to putting in all the different rules on Islam. You're taking them baby steps. This is good, but this is a higher level. You see it? Are you guys with me here?
Yeah.
This is just the beginner's level. The beginner's level is when you start avoiding the major sins and the minor sins. This is a beginner's level. An advanced level is that washkuru lillah, be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is an intermediate level. In kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. What is in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun? If you really worship the Lord Almighty. What is that? Now you have grown. Now you're a graduate. And this is really important. In da'wah, it's really important to recognize in da'wah, you have to ask yourself, 3 years from now, 4 years from now, do I still want to be in the beginner's level of my Islam? Or am I supposed to have now become a graduate where I memorized a number of different pages in the Quran, where I right now becoming a da'iyah? But if the person is still, I still need da'wah, I still need people to help me. No, but a graduate, no, I've actually learned, and now I'm trying to teach others. Now, that doesn't mean that you get offended when somebody is correcting you. Don't get offended. We all, at the end of the day, are human beings. Even if you are a shaykh, no matter who you are, you still need, that's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr. Support one another on truth and support one another on coping. No matter who you are, even if you memorize the Quran and you had all the ilm and all that stuff, and people tell you shaykh and ask you questions, you're still a human being. That's what sisterhood is for. But then there are certain things, that's a relationship between me and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is that if in order for me to grow in where I'm taking a moment to shift my vision, the difference in the beginner's level, in where you're just shifting your vision from recognizing good, wrong, beginner's level. In the advanced level, graduate level, you're shifting your focus from halal haram type of distinguish to, am I doing this for the sake of Allah or am I doing it for myself? You're shifting focus. Now we're talking not halal haram. That's a beginner's level. Now we're going another level. I'm shifting the concept. Am I doing this for myself or am I doing this for Allah? What am I doing? I'm shifting the focus between sincerity, ubudiyya, the heart. That was a beginner's level. Halal, haram, this is the beginner's level. To tell you, would you want to eat pork? You're like, well, you ask it, you wouldn't even think twice. Whether drinking is, should I go to a liquor store? You don't even think twice. That's a beginner's level, right? Now you're taking into another higher level. Am I doing this for the sake of Allah? Am I joining with the mu'min? Am I doing this with a believer? What am I doing? That's a graduate level. So here, washkuru lillah, and be thankful to Allah. Since you are right now in a graduate level, washkuru lillah. Take a moment to do your dhikr while you're eating. Take a moment to remember the bounties of the Lord Almighty. Take a moment to remember that you're in a moment of ibadah, in a moment of a special relationship between you and the Lord Almighty. It's a relationship. You're thanking Allah Almighty. You're submitting yourself to Allah Almighty. And what submission actually means, you're a moment of dhikr. I'm eating, but I'm actually in a moment of dhikr. In a moment of dhikr, meaning a special relationship between me and Allah Almighty, where I'm connecting to Allah Almighty by eating. I'll let you guys, it's 8:09. I'll let you guys connect with the food right now. Washkuru lillah in kuntum iyyahu ta'budun. We'll see you next week, inshallah. So I know that yeah, I did say that before. I know, I like that. She's like, I know you said that before. But yeah, it's even though we said that before, but we can see, sometimes it's important to repeat some things just so that we would connect the information together. So inshallah, next week, I was really hoping to actually finish this page and the page after it, but I guess I was talking too much. I'll let you guys, inshallah. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Class is done. That's what she said. Class is done. We're all set. Let's go for food. She was like, class is done. That's it. All right. So if the people online, you guys want to unmute yourselves and say something, I'd be happy to listen. Jen is not here. Oh no. Sister Jen, we missed you. All right. So I guess no one has anything to say. Alhamdulillah. Oh, you were talking about the flute. Oh, oops, sorry about that. All right. So inshallah, we'll let you guys line up, or girls,